We are officially
All right.
recording, and that privacy statement is in the chat box. You're up, Thomas.
All right. So like I said, this is the reimbursable invoice process. Most people are probably familiar with it, but we have a few changes and there's always some new points of emphasis and things to go over. So you go ahead and advance the slide. Oh, you did, okay. All right, so this is stuff, I think Robin provided all this in earlier presentations, but maybe not everybody was here. So these are active links. So once you get access to the presentation itself, the slides, you can follow those links if you need to. I would say that on the additional resources page, you can get the special terms and conditions, which Robin went over earlier. They will answer a lot of your questions. And then 2 CFR, which is the uniform guidance. Very, very, I mean, that's where I'm going to look for most of the answers to questions you might have or to straighten things out. So, yeah. And then so you'll get your new fiscal workbooks. They're basically ready to go, but I need to wait until the contracts are complete. So once they are, I'll send those out. That'll just be, well, we'll see examples later. Go ahead and advance the slide. Okay, so the first thing I want to get to is the budget and the budget narrative. So from my perspective and my role, the budget narrative is probably it's like the description of your program, just from the fiscal point of view. So you can kind of see just the screenshot of which document it is. Obviously, it's several pages more than this. So some of you probably developed this document when you did the application in eGrants. Some of you have probably, referenced it while you're doing bookkeeping. Some of you might never have seen this before, even though you do the bookkeeping. I would recommend that if you're doing bookkeeping or financial reporting, that you have this handy so that you can reference how to catalog costs or how to check other people cataloging costs. So what you can see is, so just in the screenshot I have, there's 2 categories, right? So it's in section 1, which is program operating costs. There's also a section 2 for member costs, which won't be relevant for planning grants. And there's a section 3, which will be indirect rate. But for section 1, there are categories with headings. This A is your personnel expense, and B is your fringe, C is travel, so on. So one thing we talk about is line items. When we say line item, that's what we mean is the category heading. So personnel expense, fringe benefits, etc. Additionally, you can see, so you have a description that your program developed, the description that you see to the left. Then CNCS share, Robin explained that CNCS is kind of a dead term, but it's still in there for a little while, but that's AmeriCorps. The grantee share, that's your match. And then the total is just the 2 combined. So if you have an expense listed under that whole heading, then you can vary your budget. You can deviate from your budget by up to 10% of your total budget, which is both federal share and grantee share. And you'll see that that number will appear in your PER workbook. But so you know, this is, on the one hand, I think that your budget narrative is very important in guiding the way that money is spent on your program. I build your PER workbooks off of it. The image I have of how your program works, at least from a fiscal point of view, it comes from my familiarity with your budget narrative. So that said, you do have the 10% leeway. You do have the ability to move some costs from back and forth between match and federal share. I would recommend that you create a budget that you think is representative of your actual costs and try to stick with it just to have the best possible best possible skeleton or structure to your spending over the course of the year. So if you don't have a line item cost, so for example, you didn't put anything under like staff training, but you want to spend some money on staff training, then we'll need to have a budget modification. That's a form you'll see a little later in the presentation that'll be in your fiscal workbook. And we'll just have to rework the way that your budget is allocated in order to accommodate that change. Also, if all of the deviations that you're making from your budget are going to cross the 10% line, you also need to do a budget modification. And if you think that that's going to happen, you can reach out to your PO or to me or to both of us and just kind of see how that's going to play out. So I think before we move on, I want to see if anybody has any questions or comments on the budget narrative itself. Especially if someone out there has never seen it before.
Thomas, this is Sandy with the Service Corps. I'm sorry,
Hi,
I'm
Sandy.
just, hi. When you talk about 10%, is it 10% per line item or is it 10% the technically the category?
Yes, so it's for the category, say like personnel expense. That's what we mean when we say line item, even though that's not, from the perspective of the budget narrative, that's not the most intuitive way to think of it. But for some of the other federal forms and stuff, it's clearly more of a line item to say personnel expense is a line item, personnel fringe benefits is a line item. So we mean categories.
How long is it taking, would it take to do a budget modification?
So on our end, if you okay, so the process is generally you're going to talk to your program officer, explain what you have in mind, and they'll probably discuss it with me. If you know exactly what you want to do, you can fill out the form, send it to me. Probably takes me a week, could take less to approve that. And yeah, and then it's basically done. So if everything goes well in terms of scheduling and timing and everything, probably a few days. Maybe longer if some of the steps drag on.
Can I give you a specific, because we're probably looking at having to do, and so in the personnel fringe benefits and also in the fellow benefits, we estimate a certain amount, but we don't know who's actually going to take, health insurance and all of that. And so
Okay.
our open enrollment is in September. And so we know by October what our true benefit costs are going to be, or at least, an approximation based on who took benefits at the time. And so we always end up with additional funds sitting in that line unused. And what we'd like to do is kind of move those to a different line item once we know what the true costs are going to be. So we know that about October.
Okay, yeah, so that's probably not a huge problem. If at the time you pretty much know exactly how you want to spend those funds, then it's pretty simple. Otherwise, it can be a conversation. We can figure it out.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Thomas, can I add a couple of things and you can correct me if I'm wrong?
Yep.
So one, I think we allow those conversations throughout the entirety of the year, especially if you're not approaching that 10%. If you're only moving a little bit, we don't need to have that conversation until you're approaching that 10%. As well as we do not in Washington amend e-grants. So if you are used to operating in multiple states, which I know some folks on the call are, we do all of our budget modifications internally at the local level and through our local paperwork. So the timing could be less than if you were doing a full e-grants budget amendment.
Okay, thank you for saying that. We appreciate that because yeah, it is a pretty lengthy and long process when you have to involve e-grants.
Yeah, good point. That makes sense now. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so financial management. So basically, you're going to report your expenses in the PER. Everything that you report in the PER should be verifiable with your records, your general ledger, documentation, everything. So we reimburse actual costs incurred. We don't deal with estimates or expected costs. Now, AmeriCorps does not let you match AmeriCorps funds against other funders. So nothing that's being used on the AmeriCorps grant, whether it's match or federal funds, should appear as match for any other grant. So all the grant funds should be indexed and segregated clearly in an itemized general ledger. So you can see that little graphic if you're a visual person. So one of the things that we've encountered that seems kind of natural, but it's actually kind of a problem for AmeriCorps grant bookkeeping, if you try to pay all costs out of unrestricted funds and then simply put your federal grant drawdowns and deposit them into the unrestricted funds that you just paid everything out of, that if you don't index where all the money went very clearly, and it's just kind of that pull a bunch of money out of this fund, then add this money back into the fund, there's really no way to verify that that unrestricted funding that was set aside for the AmeriCorps grant isn't being used with other grants, to match other funding streams. So, that's a big thing that we've had to kind of walk some programs through. Otherwise, this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure anybody who's, handling the fiscal aspect of things can handle the general ledger and documentation. Yeah, and if you really want to see the actual like federal uniform guidance, you can check it out with 2 CFR 200. Yeah, does anybody have any questions about financial management? One thing I'd like to be clear on, because I guess the terminology varies enough that it's not always clear, but when we say general ledger, we want to see an itemized list of expenditures. Sometimes we get categorical expenditures and you can't really tell, like, okay, you spent $500 on travel, but how much did you spend on this trip, and how much was mileage, and how much was per diem, and how much was lodging, and like, so I should be able to find a receipt or some other similar documentation for every expense, and I should be able to find evidence of that very clearly in the general ledger. Yeah, that's right, Michelle. All right. Go to the next slide. All right, so timekeeping. So in our special terms and conditions, we've added the heading under timekeeping to just kind of give a little more guidance than we've given in the past. So this, if you look to the right-hand side of the slide, that's kind of a sample of what a reasonable timesheet might look like. You don't have to have exactly that timesheet. There's a lot of things you could do with it. The main thing is you need to show all hours that a staff member was paid for. Actually, all hours worked. If they're on salary and they work 50 hours, but they technically work 40 hours, but they're going to put 50 hours as time that they worked, then all of that needs to show up on the timesheet. And so the big thing is you have to distinguish between AmeriCorps grant and non-AmeriCorps grant hours. So So whether you're charging it to the federal grant or you're just matching with the salary costs, all of that is AmeriCorps grant time. So that stuff needs to be, you know, allowable, non-prohibited, all that stuff, all in compliance. The non-AmeriCorps stuff is not held to that. But one thing that comes up from time to time, I've heard that they might be cracking down on this a little bit more when they do like investigations and stuff, is you want to allocate based on all hours during a pay period. So if you get paid the same salary no matter what, and you worked 40 hours in a week and you get paid on a weekly basis, like almost nobody does, then 30 hours out of 40-hour week is 75%. But if you worked 50-hour week and you did 30 hours on the grant, now that's 60%. So that's how you need to do the allocation within a pay period, is the amount paid during the pay period and the percentage of hours worked within the pay period that is on the grant. Need to be verified by the employee and the supervisor. And I would say that the best practice is to invoice for the reimbursement of payments that were paid during the reporting period. Not everybody does that. It's not convenient for everybody, and it's not strictly required, but it's the cleanest way to do it. Let's see. Michelle, yeah. It's a little bit of a gray area, but it seems like they expect you to keep a timesheet like this, even if you're 100% on the grant. So I would recommend it. Yes, then just remember that for living allowance, none of this applies. Living allowance is to help your member pay their living expenses. It's not compensation, so it doesn't scale with the amount of hours that they serve. And we don't reimburse for the cost reimbursement grants. We do not reimburse based on member hours. For fixed, we do, but that's different. So hopefully that doesn't confuse Sandy too much.
I'm always confused, but that's beside the point.
All right. Anybody have any questions about timekeeping?
I have a question. Can y'all hear me? I'm on a Bluetooth speaker.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. What about sick or PTO time? How do we factor that in or out of this record keeping?
I would say that generally will go to your policies and procedures of your organization. I've seen organizations do it where they never put those on the grant, and other organizations who would cover it just like any other time. I don't think that, so I don't think you're going to be able to put that on the grant per se. I think at best you can allocate the way that you allocate your salary. So if you have an allocation that's like 60% of your salary is on the AmeriCorps grant, then you can also do like 60% of your time off that way. Or you could also just have time off, be completely off the grant. That's my understanding. I don't know, maybe Robin, if you want to weigh in.
I think that would be a great thing to get a little more specific in our research and send up a follow-up message.
Yeah, okay, will do.
Well, and isn't time off part of fringe? So that's not like vacation time and things like that isn't covered sort of in that area.
I think it depends on the policies and procedures of your organization.
Okay. Because for our 100% staff, that 100%, AmeriCorps staff, if they're taking time off on a 40-hour week, so they're taking 8 hours, they're still getting paid for the full 40 hours. So their full salary is still going to the grant, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Thomas is saying, policies and procedures do come into play, so it's harder for us to blanket statement and we can follow up with something. But yes, absolutely. It's not that you can't charge our grant or any other grants for those types of costs. We in our organization choose to reflect how many hours of vacation, sick, PTO, whatever you call it, on the timesheet, so that it still equates to the same number of hours, and so that you're still allocating it between all resources unless you're 100% AmeriCorps, but we still would reflect it on the timesheet.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Did that answer everybody's question?
Yes, that helped me. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. All right, we can move on to the next slide. Oh, yeah, Michelle, I agree. And since you're 100% on the AmeriCorps grant, I think it would make perfect sense to put all of your vacation time on the grant. I think what probably doesn't make sense is if you were like 50% on the grant, 50% off the grant, and you took vacation time, you made the vacation time 100% on the AmeriCorps grant. I can't definitively say that you can't do that, but I think we would need to see policies and procedures around how that works, and it's probably not the way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Thomas. Most organizations would have a cost allocation plan as to how they treat those hours when they're charging time to multiple resources.
Yeah. Okay, so acceptable match. So this is pretty straightforward in the uniform guidance, but the basic thing I would say about your match is that it can come under every bit as much scrutiny as the actual federal funds that you get reimbursed for. So your bookkeeping needs to be at the same level, your documentation needs to be at the same level. All of the regulations apply. So like it says here, make sure that you have complete records. You're not applying them, you're not matching for AmeriCorps, then using the same funds to match another grant. That's not going to work. And then the compliance necessary and reasonable, which is, necessary and reasonable are pliable terms, but yeah, you may come, if it really doesn't make sense, then you may come under some scrutiny for that. Allowability. So are provided for in the approved budget. If you're going to be using sources of match that you didn't expect to use, that's something that you should probably talk over with us. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, I bought, this box of copier paper I didn't expect to have to buy. But, if you got a grant that you didn't think you were going to get and it's restricted funding to the AmeriCorps, that's something we need to know about. Or, you have some kind of in kind that you want to apply toward the grant. We'll need to know about that. Yeah. Anybody have questions about match? Yeah, I mean, rule of thumb is if you can't spend your grant money on it, then you can't use it as match. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so our process for invoicing. So this is not wildly different than it's been all along, but we've made some changes. So you'll get your workbook, you'll have the A19 template in your workbook. We made a little bit of a change in there. Just when you sign off on the invoice form, you'll be signing off also to certify that the PER is accurate. That is what we're doing to eliminate the FFR. So we will get the A19, we want that as a signed PDF. Then we get the full workbook with all of the PERs completed to date. If you change a prior month's PER, that's going to throw off all the cumulative numbers. So usually that gets uncovered by somebody else, but somebody usually finds that, and then I have to reach out and we have to narrow down where it is. So if you're going to make a change to a prior month's PER, please alert me to that. Then we get the member roster in PDF format that comes off of eGrants. It's pretty straightforward. For planning grants, they don't have a member roster, but we're asking for the itemized general ledger, as I had said before, and for staff timesheets. Now, we had asked for the program income report. We're not going to ask for that on a monthly basis. We're going to collect it semi-annually. We'll have some guidance for that. It's probably gonna be a little different than a lot of people have been doing it. And another note, this will come up when you're doing contracts, but be sure that you're registered as a state vendor, especially if you're new, which I don't know if anybody is new, but yeah, and then I don't know, you can see the images at the bottom, that the A19 invoice is the picture on the left, and then your roster report looks like the picture on the right. And if you're ever wondering, we have a section in the special terms and conditions that tells you exactly what we're asking for. So that's always a good reference. So those are due the 15th of every month. I generally turn them around in about a week. And a few more days for other people to do their processing, and then the payment goes out. So week and a half to 2 weeks.
Thomas, this is Sandy again. With our state financials, they're not normally ran till about the 15th or 16th of the month. Can I talk to Mary maybe about changing at least this one, the cost reimbursement one, or at a later time?
Yeah, we can be flexible if you have a situation like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, any other questions with this?
One quick question. I don't know if you know the answer to this,
Yeah.
but you guys are really quick in doing your reimbursements.
Mhm.
Is there any guidance on the AmeriCorps program or the AmeriCorps guidance on how quickly a program participant should be reimbursed once a submission is put in for reimbursement? Is there any guidance there? And again, this isn't for this isn't about you guys. You guys are really quick with your reimbursement, so we appreciate that.
So you're asking that when you invoice, say, another commission or something, what would be the turnaround that you would expect as a standard? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, you put that much better. Thank you.
Yeah, I really don't know. I think that I can tell you, when I was with the program, we were in Maryland, and like there were times when it would take 5 or 6 months, and then we'd get them all at once. So I would say that there's probably no standard and no guidelines. That would be what I would say. We try to do it in a reasonably timely fashion.
I think, and I'll look it up while we're talking and put it in chat, but I believe our state contract provides both guidelines that you must adhere to and we must adhere to. And I want to say that we are expected to turn those things around in 30 days, but I'm going to look up our state contract.
Okay.
I think that's right, Robin, but yeah, you can check. I'm actually from Michigan originally. I moved to Baltimore to do AmeriCorps Vista, and ended up also doing Volunteer Maryland. And then I was working with Volunteer Maryland, which is a state national program out there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm from Maryland. Are they good in Maryland? Good program?
So Volunteer Maryland, I mean, I loved it. They gave me a big opportunity, and I loved what we did, and I thought we had a great impact. The commission is actually called GOSV, Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism. They have their ups and downs, but I mean, I know the people there. They work hard, they're good people. But they don't get a lot of support a lot of times. So, you know, they can have every intention of getting the payments out. And, you know, if the finance office isn't playing along with them, then it's not going to happen.
If I could ask a couple questions, I'm working with the Imagine Justice project, and we're taking over the project as a new fiscal sponsor for them. So if you could just give me a little bit on what it means to be a state vendor, and maybe just a resource on how we do that if we're not already. And my other question was relating to the match funds, is if we are able to put something in the A19 for the grantee share if no funds have yet been received by a grantee, or do we have to wait to put that on a month when funds are received?
Okay. Well, the first question on being a state vendor. So my understanding is Imagine Justice will be under Tacoma Boat Builders.
Correct.
And so the payments that we send will go to Tacoma Boat Builders.
Right.
So we would need Tacoma Boat Builders to be a state vendor, which just means that you're in the system as somebody who is eligible to be paid by the state. Basically, the state can't actually make a transaction with someone who's not a state vendor. As Tacoma Boat Builders goes through the contracting process, I'm sure that'll be taken care of. But good point that that's a little bit of a complicated situation, and we don't want that to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I'll keep that on my list. Thank you.
Yep. Then the other question, you were asking if you can report match if you don't have federal funds?
No, I'm saying, so for example, there's, you know, the match funds may come in different times of the year, and there's certain items that are on the budget that the CNCS is not covering, only the grantee is covering. So what happens if there's been no match funds yet received for the year, but we expended expenses in a grantee share box?
Okay. Jenny, why don't you advance the slide to the PERs on the next page? So I'm answering your question, but first, this is the PER for anyone who hasn't seen one. Now, so you can see that those headings from your budget narrative are over on the left-hand side. Those three green columns on the left, those are going to be filled up with the numbers from your budget narrative by category. Then the next three green columns, that's going to be your reporting of your reimbursable expenses and your grant expenses for the month. Now, we tend to see that the match will be fairly consistent, but if there's a good reason that the match is not going to be on pace and it's going to come in waves like that, interesting situations like that, you can always explain what's going on in the comment box, which is in the lower right. I encourage you to use that comment box a lot, because I tend to have questions, and a lot of times it's something simple, And if it, if you're like, yeah, I see that this is a little bit different than we expected, here's why, that'll answer my question right off the bat. Some things that you'll see on the far right of this, there's some checks. So your 10% is going to be there kind of toward the upper right. So that 10% of your budget, which helps you kind of figure out the line items. Your match percentage, so there'll be your awarded match, and then your year-to-date match, and you'll also have your match for the current month. So, if those numbers seem a little bit out of line from what would be expected, you can put a comment in the comment box. And also we have the indirect rate checks there too. So maximum 5% of federal expenditures can be charged to the federal side of the grant.
That's helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Did I answer your question in there, Brian? Or
Yeah, I think overall, it just seems like it would be, it seems like something that we'll need to monitor what's come in for matches versus what we put expenditures here for, and just comment that if it's, we haven't gotten funds in to cover it.
Yeah, and for the purposes of bookkeeping, it's so say that you're waiting on a foundation grant to actually give you money, but you've spent that money on the program even though you don't have it yet. Like that's fine. You can still report that to us as match. You've spent the money on the program as match. I don't know if that maybe is also what you're talking about.
It is, yeah. That is.
Okay. Yes, that's actually going to be the program income report that you do semi-annually. Is kind of reporting like restricted funding for the program. We don't necessarily need to know exactly where your match came from in real time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Let's see. Oh, good. You guys are figuring out the state vendor thing. Okay. So just to keep walking you through the PER a little bit. So after the current month column, which is those 3 green columns, you'll see your year-to-date expenditures, which will include the current month, whatever you put in for the current month. We'll go into those. And so that's just a cumulative running total. And then the fourth column of 3 columns is going to be your budget minus year-to-date expenditures. So if you've gone a little over budget, you'll see a negative total over there somewhere. Remember, that's not the end of the world. You have 10% to work with. So the boxes at the bottom, that'll be filled in. You'll have your grant amount, and then according to your budget narrative, how much match you're going to apply. I believe the year-to-date expenditure there is going to be excluding current month. And what you'll end up with is that green box, which will be how much you can invoice us for based on your PER reporting. PER is very important. Remember, I said that every expense that you put in the PER needs to have solid backup, good documentation, needs to be really easily retrievable from an itemized expenditure report, general ledger, whatever. And there's going to be one of these for every month throughout the year. It's a little more than 12 months, just to kind of make it so we can use a template for multiple programs, and also for some reasons, sometimes people extend a little past 12 months. But I don't know that this has changed appreciably from previous years, although I've corrected a lot of formula errors. So hopefully those are done. Anybody have any questions about the PER? All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so aside from monthly, I've alluded to these a little bit, we have other fiscal reporting. The big thing is we are doing away with your FFRs this coming year. As Robin said earlier in an earlier presentation, if you have a cost reimbursable grant that's active this year, we will need your FFR for this year, but next year, we won't be collecting FFRs. All of the information that we need is in your PERs, and we just have you give that extra certification of the PER, and we can work off of that. So, so at the mid-year, we will have that program income report. It's going to be similar to what I've sent out on a monthly basis, but what we really want to know is how much restricted funding you received for this grant year. We'll also collect other federal funds. So you probably know that you can use approved federal funds as match, but you need to have proof, probably a letter from the federal funding source, that it's approved to be used to match an AmeriCorps grant. So most of you don't ever have other federal funds, but we still need to check, and sometimes people do. And then we may be collecting unexpended at mid-year. It's a decision we make later on, but and then for final at the end of the grant year, since we're not collecting FFRs, there's just closeout. We may be collecting closeout documents, which will basically be, if we collect them, a certification of inventory on the off chance you have more than $5,000 worth of inventory from this grant left over. We'll need to get a report on that. Doesn't happen very often. And so the mid-year reporting will be in April. I'll be bringing this to your attention again, probably late February in that area. And I have like more specific guidance about these, but keep them on your radar. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So the next thing that'll probably happen will be, so the contracts will be completed. When that process is done, I will send out workbooks. Take a look at the workbook, make sure I didn't mess up any numbers or names or anything like that. I didn't put you on the wrong cycle and have your program year off by 3 months or something like that. I know it's impossible to check formulas until the problems occur, but we'll keep an eye on that all year long. we're going to work with program officer to schedule a fiscal budget meeting fairly early in the year. So we can kind of go over maybe more specific things that we've covered in this presentation, and see if you have any other questions, or if things make less sense once everything's in front of you than they did while I'm just showing you a slideshow. And then if you are starting in August, your first invoice package will be due September 15th. If you're starting in September, it'll be October 15th. And that's when I'll be expecting that. So yeah, does anybody have any other questions for me? Can hang out here for a little while. I think we have quite a bit of time still on the calendar.
Thomas, can you talk about what type of documentation is needed for the indirect or admin line?
Yeah, so we have a few different systems for doing indirect. I want to, all right, so when I talked to Caitlin, she said that they were going to use the corporation's 510 system with the corporation fixed system. So that's set. You don't actually need to document it. That will be 5% of the federal expenditures can be applied toward, can be drawn from the federal funds, and then 10% of total grant expenditures can be put as match. Maybe go back a slide, Jenny.
Yeah, I'm seeing this on our budget that Caitlin sent.
One more slide.
I just wanted to verify it, and that was my understanding of it as well.
Yeah, so down there, section 3, there's line A and line B. Line A, that's where you'll find yours. It'll give a number, 5% or lower of the federal share in that first box, and then a number 10% or lower of the total budget will go on the match side of that. If you are using your organization's approved indirect rate, that'll be instead line B. You'll still have the same 5% limit that you can draw down on federal funds on the federal side, but you can use the rest of your indirect rate as match. Also, if you're using the de minimis 10%, I'll also be putting that on line B. So to completely answer Brian's question, although he's settled, if your organization is using an indirect rate, an improved indirect rate, make sure that we have your letter or whatever proof you have on file to verify that.
I also believe the indirect cost rate should be entered into e-grants,
Yes.
which you can do through your account. It's not part of your grant. It's actually in whoever holds the legal authorized e-grants account. You can go into my account and you can enter your federally approved indirect cost rate.
Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, Thomas, since we have time, and I don't know, Jenny, if you can make this any larger, but would you be willing to talk a little bit about some of the safety nets that we have on this side of the PER that kind of show people what 10% of their grant is how much their match is, where they are with their match. I find those to be really useful.
Sure. Wow, you can zoom. That's awesome, Jenny. Okay, so sorry this is all zeroed out. So if you look at, we're looking at the bars, the vertical bars on the right-hand side of the PER.
Oh.
It's true enough, Jenny. So CNCS budget, that is the amount of federal money that is authorized for this grant. And 10% of the budget is going to be 10%, not of that, but 10% of that plus the match that you've put in your application that'll show up on your budget narrative. So if you had a grant award of $400,000 and your match was $100,000, then your overall budget, which doesn't appear over here, would be $500,000. 10% would be $50,000, and 10%, in that 10% line, you would see $50,000. Single match awarded. So you had to put a match in your budget when you applied, and for new programs, the minimum allowable match is 24%, which it's a little confusing because it's not 24% of the amount that you're asking for. It's 24% of your total budget needs to be matched. So, you know, what you're thinking is, if I have $100 coming to me, I match with 24, but the reality is if you have $76 coming to you, you match with 24. So your single match awarded is going to be what your budget narrative says you've agreed to match at percentage wise. The next box, current single match, that is for the current month, what the match you have is showing mathematically. So what we want to see is your current month being fairly close to your awarded match, or exceeding it. Let's see. Then there's the year-to-date single match. That's just a cumulative version. So all match for the entire year. That's the percentage. And there's a box, or I guess a line there that says 24% on this one. I wanted to make sure that every page automatically updated the match percentage. So that's there to show. That's your minimum match percentage there. So then the next few boxes get into the indirect rate. So the year-to-date 5%, that is basically you cannot draw more than 5% of your federal funds as federal funds. So that's just a check to make sure that you're staying in line with that. The next box makes sure that your budget confirms that, which it's really funny because with rounding, a lot of times people come up as like this doesn't actually match, like this looks like it doesn't work, looks like you're over the allowable for your budget because of the rounding and e-grants. It, you know, it always turns out it's like, oh, okay, so it's like 1/10 of 1,000% over. So that's, if I fill it out and I see that that says no, I'll check the math and I'll see that it's fine, and it's fine. That's not really something you need to check on a regular basis. And then, yeah, the bottom one there is just going to be the same calculation for the current month. So just making sure that you're under that 5% threshold.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just think it's helpful to kind of cross-check, and it does some math for you, and it will actually populate no or okay. And, you know, Thomas is flexible. We're all flexible. Sometimes we know that at the beginning you might not be meeting your match and it might say no, but over time we want to see those boxes all turn into, you know, an okay. I think it populates okay if you're doing well. So just watch for those, watch for the no's and the okays to ensure that you understand what's going on. And we may ask if we see a bunch of no's or something to that fact.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Anyone have any other questions about that or something else? Well, we can hang out for a few more minutes, but it sounds like we might be done here. So
I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then if folks want to speak informally or want to ask outside of the recording,